constituency. I do not want my country being used as a place to hive off the interests of people who are making barrel bombs for Russia and Syria to kill people who then have to flee to my constituency. I do not want that. I never want to hear a story like that again. If anyone thinks that our prosperity should rely on that, it harms our nation, and we must act. She reminded us about the heinous reign of murder and suspicious deaths that is linked to dirty money. This is not just about receipts, especially where Russia is concerned. The chilling idea that Russian killers had been able to kill at will in the United Kingdom because of a reliance on dirty Russian money. She highlighted some of those cases, and just this morning we had to have an urgent question in this House because at the height of one of those murders, the poisoning in Salisbury, we do not know whether our then Foreign Secretary and now Prime Minister, not sure, we do not know who he was meeting with. In fact, no, sorry, we do know who he was meeting with. He met with Alexander Lebedev without officials, without putting anything on a public record. These are dangerous instances where we are lying down in the face of what my right honourable friend clearly highlights is not just dirty money, it is murder and deceit. She reminded us that enforcement is abysmal, and if I could give her some assurances that she is not alone in calling this enforcement abysmal. Enforcement of all crime in this country is utterly abysmal. It is no surprise to me that economic crime is falling foul of the same dreadful regime of falling charging, falling conviction, failing cases. The NCA is, in the face of this, facing cuts of 20%. So the Right Honourable member from Barnet's concerns about her ability, about their ability, is not about to get any better. Both of the members who have led this debate compelled us to take seriously the APPG recommendations, and so we on this side of the House absolutely will. The member for Cheadle speaking up of the importance of whistleblowers, and once again this is something I would totally agree with, especially when we're hearing about whistleblowers dying mysteriously. It is no small thing to step forward about crime, but when we're talking about crime with organised crime, the highest level of protection is undoubtedly needed. And my neighbour and friend from Hodge Hill made an impassioned plea that we in the UK should be leading the world on ending this corruption. Instead, we have advertised ourselves to Russia as a safe haven, and much more must be done. The government's economic crime bill is long overdue. For far too long, our country, and particularly our capital, has been a hotspot for dirty money. It doesn't need to be overdue from what I've heard in this chamber today. All the amendments are written by, whether it's the Justice Committee, as highlighted by the member for Bromley and Chislehurst, whether it is the APPG reports variously from different APPGs on whistleblowing and fair banking. We have the Foreign Affairs Committee. We have the Treasury Committee making recommendations. Good work has been done. So why is that economic crime bill so overdue? The illegal war in Ukraine and Russia's aggression has brought that into sharp focus, but let's be very clear, it should not have come to this. The National Crime Agency said in 2020 there was a realistic possibility that money laundering alone in the UK was hundreds of billions of pounds annually. The first economic crime bill was delayed for years, with the government blocking Labour amendments which would have reformed Companies House and left Russian oligarchs with fewer places to hide. I think that the member for Glasgow Central highlighted quite what is going wrong in Companies House for the House to hear. Meanwhile, economic crime continues to rage across this country. Fraud now accounts, as has been said, for 40% of all crime, yet less than 1% of police resources goes to tackling them. Millions of people are scammed every year. Like so many other crimes, nothing is done. Only 1 in 1,000 fraud offences are prosecuted, and the Serious Fraud Office made only 2 convictions in 2020 to 2021. Just 2, which is 1 more than the government managed to prosecute on child trafficking, because that was just 1, to the point that enforcement across the board is down on every form of harmful crime. Has the Minister ever tried to refer a crime of fraud? Many members have talked about their constituents and, in fact, themselves, and I'm here to tell him that I have, as there was literally a person using my name and my details to book a hotel. I knew because they were checking into the hotel and it appeared on a Google calendar of mine and at the time. And I know that they checked in because I did the sleuthing, because when I tried to report it, I mean, I might as well, I won't swear, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I might as well have not bothered. Yet I was able to ring that hotel, find out that somebody had checked in. They were literally in the hotel when this was happening, and nothing was being done. I'm a member of Parliament. Imagine what it's like for somebody who is not a member of Parliament. I got absolutely nowhere. We are still waiting for the fraud strategy. The member for Strangford, the member for Bromley and Chislehurst have both mentioned the fraud strategy. Where is it? We are waiting for it from the Home Secretary. When it comes to fraud, the government and the Home Office, I'm afraid to say, have been missing in action. Now, I know it has been a stressful day for the Minister. His entire government has collapsed around him. He's one of the few ministers left standing, one of the few ministers who hasn't had to cancel parliamentary business today. But despite all of that, I shan't let him off the hook. I'm hoping he will take this opportunity today to just answer a number of important questions, many of which the opposition have been asking for many months. Will the second economic crime bill promised in the Queen's speech be introduced before recess? Or will this important bill meet the same fate as so many others? Will this bill, like the Victims' Bill, be promised in multiple Queen's speeches before we even see it in draft form? Will the Home Office finally bring forward a fraud strategy, a promise the Minister, potentially not this particular Minister, but a Minister, made months ago? Or again, will this be a promise broken? Will the Home Office finally action fraud, which anyone who has fallen victim to fraud will know is completely failing? And if so, will the Minister update the House on what steps are being taken to replace it with something that can actually function? Given the National Crime Agency's hugely important role in tackling fraud, will the Minister also today rule out that a 20% staff cut that they have reportedly asked the NIC to make will not happen? I thank.
Minister Kevin Foster.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it's certainly an interesting day to be responding to this debate. And like the Shadow Minister, this isn't my usual field, but I had agreed to respond to this debate about a week ago. It's always nice to have those. Always nice to have those comments from the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. It's always a pleasure when she joins us. But in terms of the debate, I want to start by offering my thanks to my honourable friend, the member for Ferscombe Malton, and the right honourable member for Barking for securing this debate, and all the other members who have contributed, including even a rare chance to hear a contribution from my good friend, the member for Strangford. We all agree that economic crime poses a threat to the integrity of our economy and to the security and prosperity of the UK, along with our allies. And let us not forget the innocent victims who suffer both emotionally and financially at the hands of unscrupulous fraudsters. Economic crime, as outlined by many who contributed, affects more UK citizens more often than any other crime type. And we've had examples given today. Now, the UK, we do have one of the world's largest and most open economies, and London is one of the world's most attractive destinations for overseas investors. These make the UK attractive for legitimate business and contribute to our prosperity. but we also accept, certainly the government does accept, that this does also expose the UK to the risk of money laundering via some of those processes. Now, the Public-Private Economic Crime Plan published in 2019 provided impetus and directive for our collective efforts in this area, including through strengthened law enforcement and increased cooperation domestically and internationally. And there has been progress in tackling this threat. For example, in recent years, we've built some key capabilities, including the creation of the National Economic Crime Centre and substantial reform of the Suspicious Activity Reports regime. As touched on by a number of members in the debate, we've enacted the Economic Crime Transparency and Enforcement Act 2022, introducing reforms to enable law enforcement to take more effective action against kleptocrats who launder their funds in the UK. And we have legislated for a levy on the anti-money laundering regulated sector, which from next year will raise £100 million a year to help us combat economic crime. But I hear some of the concerns from colleagues this afternoon on the potentially fragmented nature of the enforcement landscape. Yet I would emphasise this does not mean there is not joint and coordinated working between the law enforcement agencies concerned. The ever-evolving and clandestine nature of economic crime does require a multi-agency response, drawing together the relevant expertise, capability and resources to effectively tackle this challenge head-on. You know, we believe, as the government believes, the National Economic Crime Centre plays a leading role in setting the strategic priorities for the enforcement response to economic crime and very much bringing agencies together. And the NECC leads intensification campaigns to prevent, prepare and protect against economic crime and to pursue those responsible for it. And coordinated by the NECC, the Joint Money Laundering Intelligence Task Force serves as a world-leading model of best practice, enabling tactical and strategic intelligence sharing between the public and private sectors to better tackle economic crime and support high-priority operations. But we very much recognise the need to go further, as many members have set out, and I'll briefly give way.
I noticed his theoretical description of what happens, but the practice, if anybody who puts any allegation that we get from whistleblowers into the system, it does just get passed from one of the agencies to the others, and it then falls down a black hole and you never hear about it again. So whilst theoretically cooperation and coordination take place, in practice it doesn't. And the other thing I have to say to him is, if in practice the system was working so brilliantly, why are prosecutions down so much, and why are convictions down so much when we know economic crime is going in the opposite direction?
Well, we would accept that there's a need to go further and certainly look forward, certainly following today's debate, to the debates we'll have on the forthcoming bill, where I think from what we've heard today, members across the House will have thoughts and opinions and valuable contributions to make in terms of how we can strengthen our regime, both in the way it's legally constructed, but also in terms of the direct impacts it has. And you know, we recognised in the 2021 spending review the need to invest in this area, and the economic crime levy, combined with public contributions, is now an overall package of about £400 million to tackle economic crime over the next 3 years. And we have, for example, in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the National Crime Agency established the new Combating Kleptocracy Cell to specifically combat corrupt elites, their dirty money, and those which enable them to abuse our financial system. And we do recognise we need to further empower law enforcement through the forthcoming Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Bill, which will be designed specifically to tackle economic crime, protect our national security and while supporting enterprise. And the bill will include some much needed reforms to Companies House and limited partnerships, including Scottish limited partnerships, with additional powers to seize suspected crypto assets more quickly. And a number of... Briefly.
I welcome all reforms of Companies House, but will he put it on a proper footing and make Companies House an anti-money laundering supervisor in its own right, rather than relying on third parties to do that function?
Well, certainly we'll set out in the details of the bill and we'll look forward to the debates on them. But certainly we're clear that the Register of Companies' powers should become more of an active gatekeeper over company creation and custodian of more reliable data, including powers to check, remove or decline information submitted to, which he rightly in her contribution gave the example of someone setting up a company as Donald Trump. Well, clearly that wasn't a legitimate company being established. Some who missed that particular things. And it's about the fact, but it's, again, part of the changes are, one, identity verification. It's certainly in my normal role of talking on immigration, that's something that we do quite a range of work on, ensuring people can validate who they are, what their status is, and about bringing a lot of that practice into the area of company formation to remove some of the worst examples we've heard today. I accept that's something that many people will see as overdue, that it needs to be done, but it's certainly something that we intend to legislate on and bring forward as a key change to our enforcement structure and to ensure there's less opportunity to abuse the system of company registration here in the UK. Now, there's been comments about the National Crime Agency's resources. We have increased its budget year on year since 2019, and taking all NCA funding into account, their budget has increased by 32% since 2019. In terms of the criminal liability laws, which a number of colleagues picked up in this afternoon's debate, following the concerns, we have sought to establish whether there was a case for change. I think it's the member for Bromley and Chislehurst who referred in particular to the Law Commission and the review that we'd asked them to undertake. As he rightly says, they've set out several options for reform. He outlined his view that he would like to see us accept them. I said we are assessing them, but certainly that is something that we specifically asked them to do, because we believe that's something where we do need careful consideration. Briefly.
Very persevering way. I agree that he wants to assess them, but he will be aware that this debate has been ongoing actually for quite a number of years now. Well in advance of the actual reference to the Law Commission. It's been debated in political circles and in legal and judicial circles for a great deal of time. So there's a huge amount of information there, so you can come to his assessment, I hope, very quickly.
The honourable member for his contribution. Obviously, it'd be very tempting for me with the dispatch box today and in the current situation to make a raft of pledges on behalf of the government of all the things I might like to see. I might like to see happen. But probably at this stage, I'll say that I would share his enthusiasm that we can come to the conclusions of our assessment fairly quickly. Now, the honourable member for Cheadle in particular talked about whistleblowers, and we very much recognise the value of whistleblowers being prepared to shine a light on wrongdoing, and we believe they should be able to do so without fear of recriminations. And what I would make clear, workers can seek redress through the whistleblowing regime if they are dismissed or suffer detriment because they've made a protected disclosure, and it's worth noting uncapped compensation can be awarded by an employment tribunal to reflect this. And if a whistleblower does not feel they can blow the whistle to their own employer, they may make a disclosure to a prescribed person, and there are over 80 prescribed persons. And the Department for Business, Enterprise and Industrial Strategy regularly publishes guidance for them and updates the list of prescribed persons. Yeah, certainly, very happy to.
I'm very grateful and appreciate the fact he's covering this brief. On the points he makes, if whistleblower legislation worked, why is it that my constituent Ian Foxley, who blew the whistle on GPT special projects in 2011, and that company was fined, found guilty last year, £28 million in financial sanctions? Why is it he's been out without a single penny in compensation, without a penny of earnings for 11 years? The legislation isn't broad enough, isn't all-encompassing, it needs reform, it needs it urgently.
Well, as always, my honourable friend makes a powerful case for going further, and he'll be aware the government's committed to review of the whistleblowing framework. We're considering the scope and timing of this review, and certainly we'd be very happy to engage with my honourable friend about how that can be taken forward effectively, particularly given examples like the one he's cited, although he would realise that I wouldn't necessarily want to comment on individual cases from the dispatch box. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, this has been a helpful and productive debate. I want to reassure colleagues that the Home Office and the Treasury, when leading the policy response for the government, do ensure that we do this versus a governance structure which oversees activity across the system. And this isn't the only area where our two departments work together in the national interest in terms of delivering the overall objectives we wish to see. And in closing, I would again thank members for their contributions in this debate. It is an immensely important subject. It's an area where we will shortly see significant legislation brought before the House for colleagues who I know will wish to scrutinise, examine and develop. Certainly from what we've heard this afternoon, there will be many positive and constructive engagements in that debate, and it's one that we very much look forward to taking forward, because as touched on, this isn't just about tackling crime, this is ultimately about keeping our nation and its allies safe.
Having Holland-Rake to wind up.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It has been an excellent debate, and I can thank all the members across the House for supporting the application for the debate, for the Backbench Business Committee itself for granting it, but also for the contributions today. I have learnt an awful lot, as well as the fact I've been looking at this issue for some time. Coalitions have a bit of dirty word in our party, perhaps. I'm a big fan of them, actually. Can I invite all the contributors who've spoken to this debate, and anybody else interested in this issue, to work with us, our all-party groups, on this agenda, because we are not going away. We're going to make sure the future legislation put together is fit for purpose. I think it's fair to say, for whatever reason, we have taken a blind eye to this issue for too long. Ukraine has been an eye-opener, because we've suddenly realised what this actually means and what this facilitates. Economic Crime Bill Mark II, and I welcome the Economic Crime Bill Mark I, but Mark II is coming along, and what the reforms will come from that. But I urge the government to look at the Economic Crime Manifesto, include what it can in there, and also provision other areas, particularly on failure to prevent, particularly on whistleblowers, particularly on beefing up and coordinating and strategising our resources. It's great to see so much cross-party agreement on this. All the work of the Justice Select Committee, the Treasury Select Committee, the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, are all-party groups, MPs and peers right across whatever the political spectrum. It's time we opened our eyes. We have been a world leader in facilitating economic crime. We want now to be a world leader in fighting economic crime. Thank you.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Point of order, Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On a point of order, and can I just also reassure Madam Deputy Speaker that I have informed the Minister of my point of order. I hope you'll be able to advise me on how to shed light on a series of confused and potentially misleading comments made by the Prime Minister and his Minister regarding Alexander Lebedev. During his appearance at the Liaison Committee yesterday, referring to a meeting in April 2018 in which he met with Alexander Lebedev, the Prime Minister stated, "I have certainly met with him without officials." This is a significant revelation and something no government minister has ever commented on under questioning. But during the urgent question earlier today, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister appeared to contradict the Prime Minister's claim that officials were not involved, saying that the Prime Minister did inform his officials. Later in the debate, she received word from the Prime Minister that he thinks he told officials. We must get to the facts, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a question not just of integrity, but demonstrates a complete disregard for British national security. So what action can be taken from the Chair or by members of the House to ensure that ministers keep their promises to us, to the Crown and to the British people, to allow us to get to the facts of this whole murky business?
Well, I thank the Right Honourable lady for her point of order, and I note that she said that she did inform the Minister quite correctly. It isn't for the Chair to determine on these matters, but the government front bench will have heard what she has had to say today, and I hope that they will pass back that we would expect the record to be corrected if it needs to be. In addition, the Table Office may be able to advise the Right Honourable lady of other ways she might like to pursue the concerns that she's raised today. Thank you. Thank you. We now come to the debate on alcohol duty and tax on alcohol. Alan Cairns to move.
Thank you. I beg to move this general debate on alcohol duty and tax on alcohol. I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for Gateshead and the Backbench Business Committee for selecting this important topic for consideration, as well as to all of the members of across the House who supported the case that it should be considered. Now, this debate is hugely important to a large number of businesses across the country, the hospitality sector in general, brewers, vineyards, distillers and retailers, employing hundreds of thousands of people. A disproportionate amount of them will be small businesses and with younger employees too. So getting this policy right really matters. I want to start by paying tribute to the government for recognising this Brexit opportunity. Taxation and alcohol duty has been needlessly complicated for too long, yet the UK was tied to EU restrictions preventing change. The government has set out its intentions to review the structures. They set them out in March 2020 and followed with a consultation on its proposals in October last year. The government's stated aims are to make the system simpler, more economically rational and less distortive, and to reduce the administrative burden. Now, and it's fair to say that these positive intentions are included in the thrust of the proposals as they have been set out. The consultation is welcome because it creates the opportunity for honourable and right honourable members and the industry to respond and to further develop the plans as they're set out. My comments, Madam Deputy Speaker, are aimed at encouraging the Minister to refine the proposals further now that the industry and consumers and officials have considered how they would work in practice. In relation to beer duty, there has rightly been a warm welcome for lower duty on draft beer. There's also been a recognition that the proposed 5% reduction should also apply to kegs and casks of 20 litres rather than the 40 litres that have been set out. There's been a strong indication, I would say, from the Treasury that this may happen, and I ask if the Minister is able to confirm her intentions when she responds. I would also press for a greater reduction than the 5% a pint in order to support the industry and pubs further in particular. New research published just this week has highlighted that England and Wales has 7,000 fewer pubs than it did just 10 years ago. And we all recognise the important role that pubs play in our community, in our society in large, and also providing a watching influence on people who enjoy to have a drink, rather than merely being encouraged by the cost incentive to drink at home. The plan to widen the reduced rate from 2.8 to 3.4% ABV is also a positive move. But again, a minor adjustment to 3.5% would resonate much better. This would enable the industry to innovate further and to help protect smaller brewers from the larger operators who may simply adjust their recipe to take advantage. It is important that relief, as they currently receive under the Small Brewers Relief, fully applies at this level. It would also make this element competitive with EU directives too, and provide further support to small businesses within the industry. I would happily give way to the honourable member.
And for those who have brought this forward, it's a very, very important issue and commend them for that. The last few years have impacted greatly upon the local pubs, upon the bars and the restaurants. They're the ones who have suffered. At the same time, Tesco's and Asda's, as two examples, can sell extortionate amounts of alcohol with low tax. Yeah. Others are left suffering. So does the honourable member feel that within this, the steps that government is proposing, and the Minister will speak about later on, that our pubs can pick up the business that they have once had and have lost through lowering their alcohol taxation and encouraging people to support local? Does the honourable gentleman agree that's a positive way forward?
Member makes an extremely important point that encourages what I said, some people to drink more at home because of what the large retailers can offer at discounted prices. But I would also add that both in Scotland and in Wales, I'm not so familiar with the position in Northern Ireland in relation to minimum alcohol pricing, where the retailers are the ones that receive the extra differential in comparison to what is available in England. So this gives some room for the Treasury to be able to react in a positive way to support the pubs and the brewers, as the Honourable Member and I seek to underline. The small brewers relief has proven to deliver major benefits. It enables small brewers to compete with larger operators and to innovate and to generate new options for consumers. This will be replaced by the small producers relief in order to offer similar or common benefits to the wider sector and to prevent the current cliff edge. Now again, the government's objectives here are positive, but I'm concerned that the proposed changes introduced significant complexity to the process. Moving from 5,000 hectolitres at a 50% discount to a maximum of 2,500 hectolitres at a 100,000 maximum up to 8.5% ABV, along with a cash limit and an average ABV measure, is much more complicated than it needs to be. It's hard enough to say, let alone follow the process. It also makes it much more unpredictable for the businesses that we're seeking to encourage, to innovate and to invest and to create wealth at the smaller end of the scale. So, I will give way to my honourable friend.
Can I congratulate my right honourable friend? It's an important issue and he's making a powerful speech about it. I was particularly interested in his point about broadening this from just brewers across to the wider sector. In particular, the cider sector, very important in the West Country. Thatcher's Cider, based in my constituency, are complaining on behalf not just of them, but of many other small producers about the massive increase in complexity which this collective set of changes has introduced. It may be easier to understand at a high level, but for individual firms, Martin Thatcher has written to me saying huge increases in red tape and bureaucracy brought in as a result of these proposals will result in a need for increased staff to manage monthly excise duty returns, and goes on to talk about the increased costs of that burden. I hope he's going to be able to address that and persuade the Minister to respond.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for the point he makes, and I think that the significant advantage the cider industry receives as it stands is testament to the campaigning that my honourable and right honourable friends from the South West have made to the industry because of the differential in the taxation status, and there are some who call for that to be addressed, but that is not proposed in the government's plans, and I'm not suggesting that that should change, but I think the honourable member makes an extremely important point about the complexity. So even when there are potential advantages to some sectors over another, the complexity detracts from that, and I think that the simpler the process, the better that would be. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope that the Minister would agree that the current proposal as laid out is too complex and a simplified approach would work much, much better. The principles or broad approach of this incentive are important, and I ask why there is no similar support for UK vineyards as well, all of which in the UK are small operators. These are businesses that invest for many years before receiving a return on their investment. The quality of wine competes on par with traditional winemaking countries and wins. Now, Llanerch Vineyard and Glyndŵr Wines in my constituency are excellent examples. They invest heavily, have long lead times, are excellent employers, and are as well great visitor attractions. In reality, they are small operators, and extending either the principle of the small producers relief to include vineyards, or simply by increasing the current arrangement, albeit simplified, from the 8.5% ABV limit would make a major difference and provide significant advantages to wines made in England and Wales. Support to such vineyards here in the UK would not pose risks or undermine the Treasury's ambitions and can be met within the WTO rules. The same principle could also apply to small... I will give way to my honourable friend.
My honourable friend for giving way, and this is something very specifically which has been raised to me in my constituency by Bolney Wine Estate. very particularly impacting them and other nearby producers in my honourable friend Lewis's patch in terms of Ridgeview on the edge of my patch as well, and in regard to Kingscote in East Grinstead. There is a collective ask across the English and Welsh wine industry, and I hope the Minister on the front bench will be able to help these businesses to grow, because they are small producers and tourist attractions, but above all, businesses.
Grateful to my honourable friend for the extremely important point that she is making and underlining the issues that we've highlighted. I warmly welcome the proposed... I'm limited on time, but I will give way very briefly to the honourable member.
Limited time, but look, could I thank the honourable member for giving way, and as a member of Camera, welcome the comments that he's made about the brewing industry, and if we do get that reduction to 22, then that will be very welcome. But on wine, he references rightly British vineyards, which are a great success story. But is he also concerned that in our trading relationships with many of our strongest allies, in particular when the government is undertaking a trade deal with Australia, and Australian winemakers who are seeking to diversify from their market in China, it's enormously, they're very concerned about the new complexities being introduced. Does he think that the government ought to be engaging with the government of Australia and other similar countries where our trading and security relationships are so important?
I think the honourable member makes an extremely important point. Not only is it in relation to important to businesses, as he's rightly recognised, but it's also about the international influence that these policies bring about, and his wider experience, both geographically as well as on security issues, is recognised right across the House, and he makes an extremely important point. So, as I warmly welcome, Madam Deputy Speaker, the proposed abolition to the additional tax on sparkling wine. This is particularly helpful to producers in England and Wales. 70% of wines from the UK are sparkling, and the current EU system works against them, particularly as smaller operators. So this is another Brexit dividend. The wider proposals for duty changes on wine are also have positive intentions, but in practical terms, as they stand, will leave much more complexity again in the system. The 3 current rates per bottle will be replaced by a total of 27 separate amounts per bottle, assuming that it applies to the labelled ABV. We must recognise the fact that winemakers cannot dictate a specific level of ABV. It depends on seasonal factors. Therefore, the structure of taxation should take this into account too. The administrative burden will fall particularly hard on UK retailers, particularly specialist merchants that tend to carry small supplies of a wider range of products. A small retailer, for example, could have a range of 2,000 to 3,000 different products. The variation between different vintages would also mean they become swamped in red tape, a policy that runs against the positive intentions the Minister and the Treasury has. There would also be a need to take into account permitted tolerances. Now, the good news, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that the minor adjustments can achieve the government's objectives and simplify the structure for the industry. All wines fall within the spread of 8.5% to 15% ABV. Establishing such a spread and applying a common rate would simplify the process and give the Treasury the clarity it needs. The industry believes, for example, that a rate of 12%, which would be a 4% increase on the current rate, would be a win for the Treasury, but also a win for them because of the reduced red tape. And that demonstrates the point that was highlighted about the cost of the red tape earlier. I would emphasise, however, that it may sound logical to say compromise instead of the high number of splits in the range between 8.5 and 15. Why not maybe have just 2? But that will not work out either. It might sound logical, but the complexity would remain. And similarly leave tolerance challenges as it would previously. So, just to finish this point, so taxing at one rate would help the Treasury achieve its objectives by providing clarity, but also support the industry significantly. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. Can I say I entirely agree with him, particularly on this point. A company in my constituency, Direct Wines, have
stressed of the dangers to their business if these changes go ahead. So does he agree with me that this debate should also be delayed until we've had much more chance to talk to people about how this will affect their businesses?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and he makes an important point about the complexity of the system, particularly in relation to the wines and the variations of the ABV dependent on the circumstances. I'm torn by the argument on delay, because if we can get this right, because it's only minor changes they need, let's get them as quickly as we possibly can. But clearly, as they stand, we wouldn't want to see them introduced. So if they have to remain, then it's better to see them delayed in relation to wines. So it's something of a challenge, and maybe the Minister could offer some sort of indication of how long she would expect it to take to see these changes. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, these issues are technical and complex, but are hugely important to industries that employ and entertain millions of people across the UK. Previous Chancellors have often made a name for themselves by working closely with the drinks industry on such technical issues, and have delivered a huge boost to employment, investment and society at large. And it's also gone down very well with the popular press when they get it right, because of the popularity of the alcohol sector, and rightly so. So this is an opportunity to do the same. The intentions are right, the structure is logical, but the changes along the lines that I've highlighted would ensure that this important industry can continue to develop, can continue to grow and deliver for all our constituents. I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper, Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm incredibly pleased to be able to speak in this debate. I would like to speak about beer, cider and fortified wine, sometimes known in some parts of Westminster as a work event. The former Chancellor's relief scheme for draft beer and cider excludes far too many small brewers and cider producers who need the most help. The ill-thought-out proposal to impose the 40-litre minimum container size to qualify for help has obviously been dreamt up by someone who really has absolutely no knowledge at all about how pubs up and down our country operate. Almost all craft and small batch beers are kegged into a 30-litre container. That's 6.6 gallons, if anybody is still wanting to introduce imperial measurements. And a small 4.5-gallon cask for real ale, a pin, holds just 20 litres. As do many ciders, which are delivered to pubs to dispense in 20-litre bag-in-a-box containers. 34%, Madam Deputy Speaker, 34% of licensee stock products in containers are smaller than 40 litres to improve beer quality and choice for customers. 46% of venues said that some products are only available to them in containers less than 40 litres, and 1 in 10 venues can only stock containers less than 40 litres, as they don't have the cellar space to sell the larger ones. So I do hope, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the Treasury can finally own up to the fact that they have plucked this figure out of the air and instead give small brewers, cider makers and our struggling hospitality industry the break that they need. I would ask if the Minister could confirm today that the industry is going to get the much needed assurance that the threshold will be lowered to 20 litres after all. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd also like to talk about fortified wines, because the forthcoming changes to the duty regime will have a significant and arguably disproportionate effect on pork producers in particular. In my constituency, I have one of the UK's leading distributors, Fells. They're a major employer in my constituency and in Hertfordshire more broadly, and they are braced to see a dramatic decline in their sales should this go ahead. Aside from the dramatic price increase that will follow the changes, there are very real and legitimate concerns about the implementation costs and the increased red tape. The system changes, the administrative burden, ongoing compliance with such a system will have further negative effects. The government's objectives of this alcohol duty reform consultation were welcome. It wanted to simplify the regime and reduce red tape, but the proposals simply do not do that. For wine, the proposed model cannot be described as simpler. Introducing taxation by degree will be complicated, costly and impractical. Unlike other categories of alcoholic drink, there is a far greater permitted tolerance for the alcohol content for wine made from fresh grapes, meaning that without testing every wine at the point excise duty becomes payable, it is not possible to accurately determine alcoholic strength. Introducing such a system will disproportionately hit the wine-dominant or wine-exclusive small and medium enterprises, importers and retailers who are an important element of the customer base for my constituency organisation, my constituency business, Fells. They are requesting that the government conduct a full and thorough cost-benefit analysis of the impact on the wine sector, and that this cost-benefit analysis should take place as a matter of urgency before any new system is introduced. And I'll be grateful for assurances from the Minister that they would indeed consider running this cost-benefit analysis. Additionally, under the current proposals, the suggested model actually penalises warmer climates as well. There are very limited tools available to vineyard managers to keep ABV down to an acceptable degree, and production rules actually forbid winemakers from removing more than 2% ABV. I understand that the Minister has met with the Wine and Spirits Trade Association, but they are also seeking further meetings because they are looking for an assurance that, that the government may consider instead a more workable way of taxing wine by applying a flat rate based. They're suggesting a flat rate based on 12% of ABV for all wine and 18% ABV for all fortified wine. Let me just talk as well about port and sherry, because the government's proposals would have a particularly negative impact on the fortified wine business. The total UK market for fortified wine is £311 million. Within this, port represents £82 million, and Fells, in my constituency, is the leading UK importer and distributor. The government proposals would add £1.09 duty to a bottle of port. That is an 11% increase on the average price per bottle. In a highly price-sensitive market, Fells estimates that such an increase could lead to an 11% decline in sales, roughly 1 million bottles per annum. And we know that fortified wines like port and sherry are generally not consumed irresponsibly. They're bought and consumed at festive occasions and celebrations. People buy them to mark exams and graduations and weddings and anniversaries and at Christmas. They're an occasional treat. But with the cost of living emergency, we know that treats are often the first to go. And therefore, this regime could have a huge impact on this market. So I ask the government to think again, to consult more, and not to rush this through, and to do that cost-benefit analysis. Finally, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I do believe that overall the alcohol duty reforms that are being proposed by the government are really just tinkering around the edges in dealing with the pressures that are facing hospitality. We have a broken business rate system that penalises pubs, restaurants and high street shops. We have spiralling energy costs which remain uncapped for small businesses. We have food inflation and labour shortages. I would ask the government to seriously consider bringing forward a proper plan to protect British brewers, distillers, winemakers and their distributors. Thank you.
Very much. Flip Drummond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and can I congratulate my honourable friend for the Vale of Glamorgan for securing this important debate. It's a pleasure to speak on this debate on taxation of alcohol and the government's review. And can I first declare that I'm chair of the all-party parliamentary group on Wine GB. I'm also fortunate to have some fantastic producers in my Meon Valley constituency who will have an interest in these policies, both brewers of beer, cider makers and, most importantly, vineyards. I have kept in close contact with them throughout the process of the consultations and review, and the points I make here are heavily influenced by their comments to me over many months. In Britain, we're increasingly a maker and exporter of wine. Our tastes as consumers, technological advances, and we must face it, climate change, have driven change and growth in the industry. And I very much welcome the removal of the super tax on English sparkling wine. We have some brilliant vineyards around the UK. Hambleton Vineyard in my constituency is at the forefront with their award-winning wines. This will help them develop the market at home alongside their continual success in the export market. Because vineyards face high start costs, and in the case of sparkling wine, up to a decade of careful work before they have a wine that they can market. I was pleased to see that the vineyards of Sussex, that they've recently achieved protective designation of origin, and I hope that their counterparts in Hampshire and other counties will be able to achieve a similar designation. And I will do whatever I can to help them get that recognition of their excellence. So in view of the challenges that winemakers and merchants face, I do think we have to look again at the proposals on wine duty. I appreciate the desire to simplify what has become a very complex regime. It dated from times when we neither consumed as wide a variety of wines, nor so many of them made in Britain. But the current proposals would actually increase the price of around 70% of wines, and it would affect many SMEs in the wine trade. It would also create a regime of 27 different bans, as we've already heard. The burden this would impose on independent wine importers and merchants is a mountain of red tape at a time when we're trying to reduce that generally. I know the Wine Spirits Trade Association has put a range of proposals together, which they've put to the Treasury on wine and spirits, including bringing small producers of wine and spirits into the small producers scheme available to brewers and cider makers. But a solution which I favour could be that we have a duty based on the 12% as the midpoint in the 8.5 to 15% range. This would cover 3/4 of all wine. And fortified wines have a midpoint of 18%, and that provides a logical basis for another band. It would also tie in with the global market, which regulates all wines between 8 and 15% as just one product. Turning to brewers, I particularly ask the Treasury to look again at Make It 20 campaign, which SEBA are leading. The introduction of the draft duty rate has been welcomed across the industry and by CAMRA, but supporting smaller brewers has been a long-term aim of the government. But in order to get the best out of draft duty rate, we do need to move the container size it applies to down to 20 litres. 20 and 30 litre containers are mostly a mainstay of supply for small brewers, and with the limit at 40 litres, there's a good chance that many brewers would miss out. And when we come to look at the health of the pub sector, we know that consumers want to see smaller brewers represented. YouGov had recently surveyed pub drinkers and found that more than 3/4 of respondents cited this as an important factor. Turning to cider, which was also mentioned earlier by the Honourable Gentleman for Somerset, one of the Western-super-Mare. This is an area of business which has benefited most from government support in recent years, and I'd urge the government to act on the same level for our winemakers and brewers. Because cider is a great British success story, and talking to cider makers such as Meon Valley Ciders, I look forward to them going from strength to strength. And pubs faced a tough time during the pandemic, and I argued strongly for restrictions on them to be lifted as quickly as possible. I wanted them to be able to carry on off sales while they were closed for on sales as well. During the pandemic, the sector initially recovered strongly, thanks to the Chancellor's eat out, buy one, get one free, I think it was, can't quite remember. Eat out to help out, thank you. But even with the good weather that we're having this summer, it is clear that pubs and restaurants are still operating below the pre-pandemic level. A figure of -20% is a figure that we often see mentioned. And this does leave a potential black hole in their margins, which are tight at the best of times, with some fairly rapacious major businesses in their supply chain. The macro brewers and pubcos have not been good friends to the pub trade, which is why it is vital that we support our smaller producers. The Treasury has generally taken a constructive attitude throughout this process, and I'm confident that my colleagues will continue to make sure that we get the right policies in place to help our small brewers, cider makers, and particularly vineyards.
Thank you. Mr Wood.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And it's a real pleasure to speak in this debate, and I congratulate my right honourable friend, the member for Vale of Glamorgan, for securing it at such a really a vital time for so much of the sector. It's a pleasure in particular, obviously, to speak as chair of the all-party parliamentary group for beer and brewing, the largest all-party group in Parliament, because a lot of public focus is given to the very real harm that can be caused by alcohol and by overconsumption. But not enough attention is given to the very real contributions that British beer and our community pubs pay to almost every element of life. They genuinely are, on balance, forces for good. They're a force for good economically, with beer and pubs contributing about £23 billion to GDP nationally, and as I'm sure the new Chancellor will become very aware, about £13 billion to the Exchequer. They are present in every single one of our constituencies, every part of the country. We have about 1,800 brewers, or possibly more, across the UK, including about 150 in the West Midlands. My own constituency is home to at least five breweries. And these make huge contributions to our local economies. They're a force for good for employment, with beer and pubs employing around 900,000 people, with an almost identical gender balance, and around half of those people employed across the sectors being aged under 25, and with fantastic varieties of career progressions across the industry. They're good for tourism, with British pubs being consistently named as one of the top 3 things that visitors into the United Kingdom want to do whilst they're in Britain. And they're good for exports, being the 3rd highest food and drink export sector, worth around £550 million for the UK economy, and before the pandemic, growing more quickly than almost any other export sector. And they're good for our society and for culture. And at a time where loneliness and isolation are often the biggest challenges facing some of the most vulnerable people in our communities, in many areas, the community pub really is the last of the services in those towns and villages. It is... Of course I'll give way.
Thank my honourable friend for raising both the opportunities, the career, managerial and long-term opportunities in the sector, but also around the charitable and good will and fundraising that happens in many of our pubs. I recently went to a Brave the Shave in the Borough Arms in Hayward Heath, and they were raising masses of money for Macmillan Cancer. And this sort of thing goes on up and down the land, bringing people together and bringing good causes and goodwill together equally, as well as a good time.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and PubAid estimate that pubs up and down the country contribute more than £100 million every year to charitable activities and to community causes, and a further £40 million for grassroots sports in our constituency. So they really are forces for good in our communities. But they have our pubs, our beer, brewing, and as my honourable friends have said, many of our other producers, other parts of the sector, have long been overtaxed. UK pubs and brewers are taxed around 20 times more than US tech companies compared to their turnover. They're taxed around 5 times more than UK gambling. The UK has one of the highest levels of beer duty in Europe, behind I think it's only Finland and Ireland, but 10 times that of Germany. Taken together, our pubs and brewers contribute over £10 billion in tax last year, even in reduced market conditions. 1 in every £3 that's spent in the UK pub does go straight to the Treasury, which I'm sure the Minister will be very grateful for, but I'm sure that members will also recognise the disadvantage that the burden this places on those responsible places for people to drink responsibly and in moderation when compared to the opportunities that particularly supermarkets and other off-trade retailers are able to sell their products far, far cheaper with far less employment costs and far less in terms of their responsibilities to regulate who they're selling to.
On that point?
Of course.
Thank you. I'm grateful for the honourable for giving way. Would he agree with me that it is an absolute travesty that around 10,000 pubs and restaurants could be lost if there are not more fundamental reforms to the tax system that is affecting UK hospitality? Many of them are saying that the pressures they're facing now are even worse than they were during the pandemic. Would he agree with me that we need to go much further than just the alcohol duty reforms?
Well, I think there's obviously been a very long-term trend in moving away from drinking in pubs and on trade towards supermarket sales as shares of the market. Now, some of that will be natural changes in consumer preferences and people's lifestyles, but we shouldn't be allowing the tax system to aggravate those trends where they have such real social and economic consequences. So I think where we can tweak the tax system, make sure that our pubs, our brewers, our other producers are getting a fairer deal, and that this can reduce some of the disincentives to be consuming drinks within well-regulated public houses, then I think we should do so. I do welcome the alcohol duty review. I think it is a massive step forward because, of course, as well as the duty, the level of duty, which, as I've said, is much higher than most comparable countries, all of that is, of course, compounded by not only VAT, but also extremely high levels of business rates. So I do hope that we will be able to look at how our system of local business taxation can be further modified. Clearly, the Treasury have been piloting attempts to charge digital and online companies as a starting point, and I think that's an important starting point. But we do need to make sure that our taxes on clicks are comparable to our taxes on bricks, so that those sectors that are by their very nature have to be, they operate in the real world. Nobody has yet established a viable online virtual pub. I know a few tried during the pandemic. I don't think any of those experiences quite worked out, and I think it's very noticeable that most people come, when was it, April, May last year, were very quick to get back to the real thing rather than the online equivalent. But on the duty review, the reforms that are being proposed are hugely welcome, particularly, I say, the banding that recognises the progression as you go through alcohol strengths, so that higher strength alcoholic drinks pay not quite exponentially more, but certainly progressively more levels of duty compared to low strength drinks. The changes to the low alcohol band for beer from 2.8 to 3.4 will make a big difference in terms of the availability of good quality lower alcohol beer. It is relatively simple for brewers to change recipes to bring down a 3.6, 3.7% real ale down to 3.4, much easier than it is to get it down to under a 2.8 threshold without changing the character of those drinks. Although I do agree with my right honourable friend that 3.5 would clearly be preferable if we're looking at those details. Similarly, on the proposals for small brewers relief, I think that what's being proposed is hugely preferable both to the system we currently have, but also to the initial proposals that the Treasury had brought forward that I think would have caused a lot of difficulties for relatively small breweries. I think these changes, whilst I accept that they take a while to get your head around, and I think that's probably putting it lightly, I think the distorting effect that the current system has with its sharp edges that act as very strong disincentives for growth, that impose an unnatural plateau around 5,000 hectolitres, that mean unless you can be confident that you're going to grow significantly beyond 5,000 hectolitres, you have very little incentive to invest in the extra staff and the extra capital to do so. I think the system that's proposed is far better, and it is very noticeable that what had long been probably the most contentious issue within the beer sector has now actually brought people, whilst there are some details each of them might like to change, the overwhelming majority of the sector now feels this is something that they can live with. And I would suggest that perhaps the Treasury might like to look at whether some form of small producers relief might be possible for wine producers as well, to extend it beyond beer and cider, to include small wine producers, which I think would also have a particular benefit for English wine producers. And of course Welsh wine producers, and for the SNP bench, I'm sure that I don't know the scale on which Scottish wine producers are operating at the moment, but I would imagine that Scottish producers would probably fall mostly within the smaller category. And finally, on the proposals for the differential rate of beer duty, the draft beer duty rate, and this was a fantastic proposal that the previous Chancellor announced in his budget last autumn. It has the potential to make a big, big difference to supporting responsible drinking within our beers, our pubs, our cafes, our bars, instead of our supermarkets and, let's be honest, our park benches and town centre street corners. The difference it can make will depend on the scale of that differential. The 5p differential is a good start in establishing the principle, getting a new system up and running. It's likely to mean that almost all of that differential is retained within pubs and brewery, which in itself will typically mean around a £2,000 additional investment available to pubs. But if we want to see consumers, beer drinkers, benefit from the draft beer duty rate, that differential is going to need to be widened. I think it's only really once you get to the 10-15 pence stage that you start to see a real difference in what customers are paying for a pint at the bar, and that's when it also has the difference in encouraging people to drink in regulated on-premises instead of buying from the off-trade. So we'd obviously like to see that increased. We'd also, if possible, like to see it introduced at the first available opportunity. I know that the Treasury were looking at something being introduced probably in spring of next year. Given the difficulties that we all know that the hospitality sector have had over the past 2 years or so, if a suitable fiscal event or financial instrument was to be found that would allow this to come into force before this year's Christmas season, it would make a massive difference in helping the pubs that the Honourable Lady for St Albans was referring to that may be struggling, may be on the edge of either going under or just about managing to stay afloat through the winter. I think bringing this in early would make a big difference. Now, clearly there's been a very lively debate over container size. 20 litres is very obviously the correct answer. I think from discussions with the previous Chancellor and previous Economic Secretary, I think that they recognise the 20 litres was also where this needed to end up. I very much hope that incoming ministers will now reach the same conclusion. I think actually the previous Chancellor broadly accepted the argument that 40 litres was probably not the right container size for the threshold when he was pictured with the Prime Minister holding 30-litre containers to launch the policy. So 20 litre will make a big difference to the range of particularly our smaller brewers, the types of beer that can be made available, but also I think we need to look at the provisions on distribution mechanisms so that they don't necessarily have to be connectable to either a gravity-pulled or electric-pulled draft system, that the pins of the kind that you see typically in beer festivals in all of our constituencies, where it's just a tap in the side of a barrel, if it's over 20 litres, I think that makes a lot of sense. So I'm talking to some of our brewers. They estimate it's less than 0.1% of their beer is sold through those taps. We're not risking seeing a massive distortion in the market from people buying huge numbers of them for parties at low rates of duty. It is a minimal cost to the Treasury just to make it apply to all containers over 20 litres. Clearly, the system that they've introduced in Australia a few years back that does have a requirement for the connectors, as partly the Australian market is very different. They also have a much lower threshold. I think it's as low as 8 litres from memory, but I think 20 litres will capture virtually all of the beer that virtually all of the small brewers that we're trying to support, that supply through our pubs and our licensed premises, they would benefit from this. So I would hope that the Treasury in their final decision will settle on that as the obvious figure. So once again, I thank my right honourable friend. I thank the Treasury for all of the discussions that we've had over the past couple of years, and particularly since the publication of the duty review. And we look forward to these measures being introduced quickly so that our brewers, our publicans and UK hospitality as a whole can benefit, succeed and thrive.
From bench wind up, Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. And can I say what a pleasure it is to speak in this debate and to congratulate the Honourable Member for the Vale of Glamorgan on securing it. I'll begin my remarks by declaring my membership of the all-party parliamentary group on Scotch whisky, and also say how pleased I am to see, after a day of turmoil, that the Minister is in our place. I'm going to have to get to grips with two other ministers that I shadow, so it's nice to see some continuity somewhere in at least one area of the responsibilities I have for my group. Alcohol duty is something that I think has been ripe for review for quite a considerable period of time, on the grounds of complexity, on the grounds of the economic impacts it goes on to have, but also on the social and health impacts that it can have in terms of how behaviours might go on to be influenced. And I think it's something that, well, I know it's something that could have been done at any time. There's contrasting levels of duty that are applied across the European Union. The UK was towards the higher end of that, but there were many other countries that had considerably lower rates. And so, you know, it's certainly not a Brexit benefit that the UK government is able now to turn its attention to this. Now, the previous Chancellor clearly had an agenda to simplify the duty regime. it's perhaps understandable that the current Chancellor hasn't had a chance to get round to sharing with us what his thoughts on that might be, or possibly he may not even be Chancellor past the autumn, depending on how the cards fall. So it is a moment where I think it is ripe for debate and reopening some of these issues, because to my mind, ideally, what any government ought to be looking for is a regime which supports domestic innovation, which product innovation and technological innovation, and there is an awful lot of it in the alcohol producing sector. So supporting that innovation, supporting that investment and production, but also keeping the social and health impacts of alcohol consumption in mind. And on that measure, I have always taken a dim view in terms of the review and the parameters that were set out so far about the apparent bias that there is against stronger alcohols such as whiskey and vodka and gin, and I will go on to explain why that is. Like I said, I'm a member of the APPG on Scotch whisky, and although, and in my own constituency in the northeast of Scotland, there are 3 fairly significant distilleries there. There's the Glendronach distillery near the village of Ford, there's Ardmore near the railway at Kennethman, and also Glengeary, which sits unusually for a Scottish distillery, not in an iconic natural landscape, but slap bang in the middle of the town of Old Meldrum. If you're driving through Old Meldrum, you actually drive through the different buildings and the distillery, depending on what route you take, and it really is quite remarkable. And if anyone is in the northeast of Scotland, I would encourage you to pay a visit. Give me a shout, I'll come along with you, because it's great to be able to show off such a distillery. But as well as producing excellent products, they're also right at the heart of the visitor economy that we have there. And together with the rest of the whisky sector, they make an absolutely enormous contribution to Treasury revenues and also to the UK balance of payments. But it's not just the whisky that's important in that. Many distillery sites in Scotland are also producing the spirit that's needed to make vodka or to make gin. And again, in Aberdeenshire, there is a burgeoning sector of craft gin manufacturers and those who produce the botanicals to go along with that. So there is a real innovation there, which is... I wouldn't wish to overstate this, but it seems to be iniquitous that we are taxing that domestic product at such a high rate and perhaps influencing consumer behaviour to prefer other forms of drink that are not produced domestically as a consequence. Now, I think those levels of duty are disproportionate, and that's harmful on a number of levels. For one thing, and I know from my discussions with the industry how significant this is, that it becomes very, very hard when trying to strike trade deals, which the government's obviously doing its best to do at the moment, but to encourage other jurisdictions to similarly, or to bring down sometimes the punitive rates of duty that they apply to those products. Also, in terms of the inhibition that as well as some tariffs, the tariffs put on the bourbon sector, you might think that, or people might think that bourbon is a conflicting product, a competitor product. In many ways, it's actually a complementary product because of the nature of ownership of the distillery, of the distilling industry, because quite often it's multinational companies that own bourbon, that are trying to sell bourbon in these markets, that are also investing heavily in the Scotch whisky industry and in new production and new practices. So it is all interlinked, and the high level of taxation that we put on that product on the shelf is something which is not very helpful. Finally, Mr. Deputy Speaker, let me get round to saying something about minimum unit pricing. Now, this was a policy which was introduced in Scotland. It was, I think it's fair to say, quite controversial at the time. It was attacked for a number of reasons, good and not so good. But we've now experienced that policy in action for some time, and I can report happily that there haven't been the predicted traffic jams at the border on the A1 at Berwick or the M74 at Carlisle of people doing booze runs there. That did not happen. But the most valid criticism, I think, of that policy approach wasn't so much about trying to increase the price, but it was that had an impact on the price, that the benefit did not go to the government to invest in health measures, but it instead rested with the retailer. I think that was a very fair criticism, and I think, just to finish the point, then I will give way. And I think it's fair to say that if any Scottish Government had had control over the range of duties applied to various drinks, they may have had a minimum price in mind, but would have used duty as a mechanism rather than imposing that on the retailers. I give way.
No, I would just mention the point that minimum unit pricing has also been introduced in Wales, and their feedback has been very positive also.
Thank the Honourable Member for Caerphilly for that intervention. It has indeed been introduced in Wales, and I think that the evidence as it builds, which I will come up to, is that it has been a very positive thing in both jurisdictions. Also, we need to look at promotions. The minimum pricing and other associated policies around it ended the practice of supermarkets using cheap alcohol, below cost price alcohol, as a loss leader to draw people through the doors. So the evaluation that has taken place to date of minimum unit pricing in Scotland, and I'm sure similar evaluations will be underway in time in Wales, is that in the 12 months following its introduction and pre-pandemic, that there was in Scotland a 2% reduction in off-trade alcohol sales, but most significantly a 10% decline in alcohol-specific deaths in 2019. So with more alcohol being drunk at home and the changes in behaviour that we've seen throughout the pandemic, I think it's reasonable still to conclude that the minimum unit pricing as it is contributing to a lower level of harms and adverse health and crime and social outcomes than might otherwise be the case were that not in place. And all of that, Mr Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, has been part of an initial suite of measures about trying to change the relationship that we sadly have in Scotland with alcohol. We can have an incredibly positive relationship with alcohol, but we can't be blind to the impacts that it can go on to have. And I'm very pleased that the Scottish Government is carrying out a review into the effectiveness of the current system of alcohol brief interventions, where people have exhibited problem behaviours, and also to have a review of marketing in terms of how the product is presented to the consumers as part of a way of delivering those improved public health outcomes. I believe that a review of where we are with duties is a ripe opportunity to do that, and I certainly would be failing in my duty as an SNP spokesperson to say that wouldn't it all be better if this was also devolved. Thank you.
Point of order, Mr Mike Wood.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, for allowing me to raise a point of order. I should have drawn the House's attention to my entry in the Register of Members' Interests relating to hospitality I've received from appropriately the hospitality sector. Can you advise as to how I may put that on the record?
To thank Mr Wood for his point of order and his forward notice of it. He's just done that, and thank him for correcting the record at the earliest possible opportunity. Bina upon Azari.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I begin by congratulating the Honourable Member for Vale Glamorgan for securing this backbench debate. I believe he has covered all the points very well. Despite this very strange situation we find ourselves in this afternoon, I welcome the opportunity to debate the principles behind the taxation of alcohol and the details of the government's alcohol duty review. I'm very glad that the government has managed to find a minister to respond to this debate, and I do welcome her in her place. We will see if the review survives the government change of government that's taken place. Over recent months, I have been engaging with representatives across the alcohol sector about these significant changes. The alcohol duty review represents the biggest change to alcohol duty in decades, and so it's therefore welcome that this House has had the opportunity to consider the changes in advance of the legislation coming forward, and I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for bringing that forward. Can I also thank all the other Honourable Members who have also contributed, many of them who have spoke on behalf of alcohol producers and retailers in their constituencies. It is clear that there are a great many breweries, cider makers, distilleries, wine shops and other alcohol-related businesses playing important roles in supporting local jobs and economies. And of course, we all know the importance of pubs to our local communities. It is good that honourable members have been able to champion these businesses today. Before turning to address some of the specific issues, I would like to set out principles Labour believes should guide these changes. We agree that the alcohol duty system should be simplified and be more consistent. For this reason, we do welcome the principles behind the alcohol duty review, but we believe careful consideration should be given to individual changes. We recognise that there is a balance to be struck between supporting businesses and consumers, protecting public health and maintaining an important source of revenue for the Exchequer. Importantly, the Treasury must make sure that there are not intended consequences as they seek to make these changes, and we've heard about some of those today in this debate. We also believe that special attention should be given to ensuring that small domestic producers are able to compete with global players across this industry. I will now turn to some of the specific proposals for each category of products, starting with wine. The government is proposing significant changes to wine duty. Currently, wine is taxed by volume rather than by strength, and the Treasury states that there are a number of anomalies and distortions in the current system. The alcohol duty review therefore proposes that all wine products will be taxed in reference to the ABV. It also proposes abolishing the different rates for still and sparkling wine, which will benefit English sparkling wine producers. Some honourable members have raised some of the issues of complexity in relation to wine duty, and I've also heard these concerns directly from the industry. The Wine and Spirits Trade Association say that the proposed system will replace one band with 27 bands, resulting in a significant increase in red tape for businesses throughout the supply chain. This is likely to cause particular problems for SMEs, including SME importers and retailers, and I hope the Minister is aware of these concerns, and I'm sure all honourable members will be interested to hear from her about any changes the Treasury is considering to mitigate the impact on the wine industry. We believe that the government should set out a comprehensive assessment of the impacts that these proposals will have on the regulatory burden faced by businesses in the wine sector and the steps that the government intends to take to mitigate them. I now turn to beer duty. Overall, the government's proposals for beer duty are relatively minor, as the current system is already based on the ABV of the product. The reduced rate for products below 2.8% is being widened and will now include products of up to 3.5%. And I note that this has been welcomed by the Campaign for Real Ale, who say that this will be an incentive, will incentivise the production of lower strength beers. However, the Society of Independent Brewers has raised concerns that this change may allow lower brewers to undercut small brewers. Could the Minister please look into this? The alcohol duty review also announced that the government's intention to introduce a new draft duty discount of 5% for draft products sold in large containers. Labour welcomes these proposals as an important way to support pubs as they recover from several very difficult years during the pandemic. However, there are some concerns that the proposal to set 40 litres at the minimum container size risk excluding small brewers and small community pubs who often use about 20 to 30 litre containers. We believe that the government should set out how many small brewers would benefit at a different minimum of containers. So can the Minister address this in her wind-up? Turning to cider, the alcohol duty review states that cider duty is not well-structured tax, as high-strength ciders currently pay proportionately less duty than those at lower ABV. The review also directly links this to high rates of problem drinking associated with strong white ciders. But this review continues to treat cider favourably, with rates less than half that of beer. We do recognise the importance of cider making to many rural communities, but is the Minister concerned that these proposed changes will not go far enough in tackling the problems drinking associated with very strong ciders? And will she set out what assessment the Treasury has made of public health impact of different rates of duty on high alcohol cider, given it makes up a disproportionate amount of alcohol-related harm? I now turn to spirits. Spirit distillers, and in particular the Scottish whisky industry, make very important contribution to the UK economy and are a very important export to the UK. So I do urge the government to work with this industry to ensure it remains competitive. The government is not making significant changes to structure a spirits duty, but we welcome the government reducing on spirits below 22% to encourage the development of lower strength spirit-based drinks. Finally, I would like to say a few words about the proposals for new small producers relief. Labour introduced the small brewers relief in 2002 and is proud of the effect it has in supporting small brewers and creating the vibrant UK beer scene that we know exists. We therefore support proposals to extend the scheme to other product producers, but believe the Treasury should work closely with representatives of small brewers and cider makers to make sure it continues to work effectively. As you know, the devil is always in the detail. I've also had concerns from wine and spirits industry that proposed small producer relief would not apply to products above 8.5% ABV. The government therefore needs to explain why it is excluding small distillers and small English and Welsh winemakers from this relief, and what assessment it has made of the merits of including them. I will end my remarks here, and I look forward to hearing from the Minister on all of the important points that I've raised. There are major changes which will affect businesses and consumers, and they deserve careful consideration. We will be scrutining the forthcoming legislation closely, and I look forward to debating these issues again in the future. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Thank you very much. Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to respond to this debate brought by the Honourable Member for the Vale of Glamorgan, and I congratulate him on securing this debate. And it's been good to hear Honourable Members across the House and, of course, the chairs and members of very important APPGs on this subject. It's very clear that my honourable friend, the honourable member for the Vale of Glamorgan, is an ardent advocate for producers and traders in his constituency. And indeed, Wales has a historic association with alcohol production going back 4,000 years, and today produces many ciders, beers and wine. The Honourable Member for Meon Valley has also talked about the producers in her constituency. As many people have mentioned today, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are making changes to outdated, arbitrary and inconsistent alcohol tax laws. And the reforms that we are proposing will make the system fairer, simpler and more aligned to public health goals than the system that we inherited from the EU. As the Honourable Member for Erith and Thamesmead said, these are significant reforms that we are making. But before addressing the excellent points that have been raised today, I want to remind members of the major changes we are making to improve the duty system. Reform of our alcohol tax laws is long overdue. These laws have barely changed since the 1990s. This is largely because incoherent and prohibitive EU rules have been in the past hindered by much needed change. In the current system, a high-strength white cider will pay less duty per unit than a low-strength beer. Sparkling wine, a product which the UK has world-leading examples of, pays much more duty than still wine, even when it's substantially less strong. Fortified wines are made with the addition of spirits, and yet they pay less duty than a liqueur made with spirits even if they're the same strength. We have inherited 15 rates from the EU across 5 different products and with 3 different methods of taxation. This current system is complex, is archaic, and the Institute for Economic Affairs said that it defies common sense. Producers, importers, and exporters in this country have called it distorted, perversely incentivized to produce stronger drinks, and welcomed the opportunity for reform. We agree. And now we have left the EU, we have an opportunity to create alcohol laws that are more rational and support the many and varied producers and traders in this country that we have heard about today. So I'd like to take this opportunity to remind everyone of the significant benefits which have been introduced with our reforms. A radically simplified system, slashing the number of bans from 15 to 6, and taxing all products in proportion to their alcohol content. Taxing all products in the same rational way, a policy which was banned by EU law. Ending the premium rates on sparkling wine and equalising them with still wine, and substantially reducing duty on rosé. New rates for low-strength drinks, below 3.5%, encouraging innovation and reflecting consumer preferences for the low or no alcohol market, and cutting duty on a 3.4% beer by 25 pence a pint. Modernising the taxation of cider, targeting unhealthy and problematic white ciders, while cutting the duty for lower ABV craft and sparkling ciders. Introducing small producers relief, supporting the many small artisan alcohol producers who continue to create world-leading products in this country. These are benefits that would not have been available to us before we left the EU. I'm very happy to give way to that.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. Could you clarify which specific EU regulation was preventing us from duty reform?
There are many laws in the EU, as the Honourable Member will know, that have dictated our laws for many years, and those are the regulations and directives that we're changing, not just in this area, but in many others. But coming back to the system that we are producing, we ran a consultation after the autumn budget until January of this year, and Treasury officials have met with many stakeholders from across industries and public health groups. The Honourable Member for St Albans said we need to consult more, but I can assure her that Treasury ministers, largely the former XST who's responsible for this area, has met with colleagues from across the parties. We've spoken to and visited businesses from the smallest to the largest. We've welcomed representations from many of the most important trade bodies, and we've sat down with the Australian High Commissioner, all to ensure that at the Treasury we have heard all points of views on these reforms. And I can assure the Honourable Lady and others that we are listening. And I'm going to come on to the points that many Honourable Members have made. We've heard from those industries, businesses and colleagues where they have some concerns, and we have and we will continue to listen to the feedback, and the comments that have been made in this debate will form part of that listening. And we're actively thinking about how we can reduce burdens on businesses while still preserving the many benefits of the system, not least the clear and obvious public health benefits of taxing products by their alcohol strength. Now, many members have talked about issues with keg size. The Honourable Member for Neon Valley, the Vale of Glamorgan, the Honourable Member for St Albans and Dudley South. And I want to assure those members that while I can't give any announcements today, that we are absolutely listening to that point. My honourable friends from the Vale of Glamorgan and Dudley South and others talked about how small producer relief is too complicated, and I want to reassure honourable members and friends that we are determined to get rid of the cliff edge to support growth of small brewers. Other honourable members have talked about the duty charges on wine, and I know, because I have spoken to the former XST, and she has told me how she has been engaging with the sector on this very issue. The Honourable Member for St Albans mentioned that she had visited the Wine Society and heard their views, and I know that the Treasury is looking at ways to reduce the administrative burdens. The Honourable Member for St Albans talked about fortified wines, she will know we are reforming duty on fortified wines to ensure that these products pay a consistent rate of duty per unit with still sparkling wines and high-strength beers. We're increasing the duty on fortified wines to equalise the duty on spirit-based liqueurs such as Baileys, because both drinks are made using spirits, and we think it's right in those circumstances that they pay the same rates. The Honourable Member for Weston-super-Mare and others, Meon Valley and others, talked about cider, and I hear what those members are saying. They will know that ciders will benefit from new reduced rates for lower ABV ciders below 3.5% ABV, and as part of our new draft relief, we will cut duty rates on draft fruit ciders by 20% to equalise them with beer, cutting 13 pence off a pint. In addition, nobody has mentioned today, but I would just like to reiterate that we announced in the autumn budget of 2021 that we froze cider duty for the 4th consecutive year. Now, the Honourable Member for Gordon talked about Scotch and other spirits. I'd just like to remind him that at the budget, the government froze spirits duty, saving 52 pence off a bottle of Scotch, compared to if duty had risen with inflation. And spirits duty, because of the decisions that we've made, our spirits duty rates are at their lowest level since at least 1918. It is a really important industry for us, and we have an exceptionally competitive environment for Scotch to succeed. Domestic whisky volumes have in fact expanded year on year throughout the pandemic to reach their highest levels since 2013, growing 11% over the last 2 years. I want to reflect. I'm very happy to give way to the Honourable Member.
I thank the Minister for giving way. I'm just looking at a graphic here which showed that when duty on a shot of whisky in the UK was 46 pence, duty on the same measure of whisky in Spain would only have been the equivalent of 12 pence. I'm wondering what Brexit benefit it might be that's resulted in that differential staying there, even with whisky duties being frozen.
The Honourable Member will know that the benefits of Brexit are we now can make these decisions ourselves and reflect our own industries and what we want to do as a government going forward. I want to reflect that we have heard many positive responses to the changes that we have made, and we welcome the substantial benefits that they will bring to businesses. Respondents to the consultation said that they wholeheartedly welcome the direction of the proposals, and I know many honourable members have mentioned some positive features of the proposals today. It has been called a genuinely significant achievement, and crucially, to a country that puts its people first, a public health group described the reforms as the largest and most positive shift from the perspective of public health in contemporary alcohol policy. Madam Deputy Speaker, in closing, I'd like to thank all my colleagues who've contributed to this important and insightful debate. We will soon confirm details of the reforms and publish the draft legislation for consultation alongside the government's response to the consultation. We have before us a once-in-a-generation opportunity to reform and improve an outdated system, with new incentives for producers to diversify and innovate, and introducing a direct boost for pubs. The reforms are more rational, they are fair, they are better aligned to public health goals, they are better aligned to consumer preferences, they support the great British pub and support small producers producing fantastic world-leading products. Our reforms spell exciting times for alcohol businesses in this country and will protect our brilliant heritage in alcohol production and trade in this country.
Alan Cairns. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's been a privilege to consider this debate, and I'm grateful to all of the members that have contributed. I think it's quite obvious to see that right across the House there is strong support for the need for change, and there is also strong support for the direction of travel that the government have introduced. But there is also a recognition for needs for further change. The Right Honourable Lady for St Albans highlighted the challenges to fortified wines, amongst other things. My right honourable friend from Meon Valley talked about a range of issues, the importance of wine, particularly to her constituency, as well as the need to consider one broad range of 8.5% to 15% of ABV as being a key issue. The Minister responded by highlighting that 15 rates would come down to, across 5 products, would come down to just 6 rates. And that is a positive step, but it doesn't recognise the 27 amounts per bottle of measures that would need to be on wine alone and the different rates that would apply and the difficult way of predicting it. My honourable friend, the member for Dudley South, a clear champion of the beer industry, really drew attention to the importance of the sector, but also the welcome move of the changes and some adjustments that need in order to secure it. The honourable member for Gordon quite obviously rightly highlights the importance of duty on Scotch whisky and the impact that that has, and also I would suggest recognises the Brexit opportunity that comes from that gives the Scotch whisky industry. And the honourable lady from Erith and Thamesmead highlighted some of the issues that many members on this side of the House highlighted, which I think draws attention to the consensus that exists across the House for change in this area, along the lines that the government is pursuing, but clearly in a way that would really support the industry and support the Treasury in raising the revenue it needs, but do in a way that reduces red tape, but also allows for innovation to take place. I'm grateful to all honourable members and right honourable members. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. The question is, as on the order paper, as those that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
I beg to move that the House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Wayne David.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last November, a 10-year-old boy, Jack Lees, from Pennebryn, Penrowell, in my Caerphilly constituency, was killed by a vicious dog. The dog attacked and killed Jack in a neighbour's home. The dog was an American XL bully. In the trial which concluded last month, one of the defendants in whose home Jack died was sentenced to 3 years. The other defendant, the owner of the dog, received a sentence of 4.5 years in a youth offender institution. The dog, called Beast, had been bought on the internet only a few days earlier. There can be no doubt that the dog had huge behavioural problems and was not going to be kept as a normal pet. Indeed, the previous owner of the dog stated that he was selling the dog because he couldn't cope with it anymore, and the dog was described as aggressive in its for sale advert. Moreover, CCTV recording showed how the dog threatened and tried to attack people on the street. It is worth noting that during the course of the trial, the man who owned the dog breached his bail conditions in a blatant way. It is a view of Jack's mother, Emma, who has been incredibly brave, that the sentences given to the 2 defendants were far too lenient. This is also a view of the local community in Caerphilly, and it is my view as well. An e-petition has been launched by Jack's mother, and it clearly expresses the view of so many people about the leniency of the sentences that have been handed down. In response to the representations which Emma has made to the Attorney General's office, she has been told that it is not possible to refer these sentences to the Court of Appeal. Although the law officers do have the power to ask the Court of Appeal to review certain sentences which appear to them to be unduly lenient, this power does not apply to sentences under a piece of legislation which is applicable here. I understand, however, that the Secretary of State for Justice does have the power to add to the scheme where a review can take place. I would therefore like to ask the Minister to speak to her colleagues in the Ministry of Justice so that they can give active consideration of the Dangerous Dogs Act 1991 being included in the scheme. But it has to be said that even if the sentences in this case were referred to the Court of Appeal, the sentences of the two defendants could not be changed, as they could not be retrospective change. It is nevertheless important that we learn the lessons from what has happened in this terrible situation when we look to the future. It follows from what I have said that the sentencing guidelines themselves ought to be rewritten and strengthened in the light of this case. Another important lesson from this terrible case is that the Dangerous Dogs Act of 1991 itself is woefully inadequate and inappropriate in dealing with the issue of dangerous dogs. The attack on 10-year-old Jack Lees is truly tragic, but attacks by dangerous dogs are not a rare occurrence. In the last 10 years alone, more than 20 people have died after being attacked by a dog. Each year, some 200,000 people are attacked by dogs in England alone. In Wales, there have been over 200 incidents involving dangerous dogs during the last 6 months or so. And in Gwent, which includes Caerphilly, between September 2021 and February of this year, there were 69 dog attacks reported to Gwent police. 3 of these were on children who were 17 or under. The main piece of relevant legislation is the Dangerous Dogs Act 1991. This applies to England, Scotland and Wales. It is under this law that the two defendants to whom I referred to earlier were convicted and sentenced. They were found guilty of keeping or allowing a dog dangerously out of control where death is caused. I refer to how I believe that the operation of this part of the Dangerous Dogs Act could be significantly improved by strengthening the sentencing guidelines. But I believe that there does need to be a fundamental rethink of the law as it applies to dangerous dogs.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Honourable Gentleman for bringing this forward, and it is an issue, although as he rightly says, the issue for law in England, Scotland and Wales is specific, Northern Ireland is devolved, but the issues there are very similar. For example, one of my constituents just about 6 or 7 weeks ago were out for a walk with their young dog. The dog was attacked by 3 or 4 other dogs. The dog then was put down shortly after that, and indeed it died shortly after that. An example again of legislation that doesn't work. To address that issue, my constituents then had to take a private court case against the person, which added to the court trauma. Now I understand that the Honourable Gentleman is trying to bring forward a change in legislation which hopefully the Minister can review and look at. Whenever that is done, could I ask, would the Honourable Gentleman be also agreeable to perhaps share that information with the Northern Ireland Assembly and with the devolved administrations, so that we can all have better legislation, not just for the Honourable Gentleman's constituents, which is very tragic. I'm very, very sorry to hear it, but for all of us across this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland together. Thank you so much.
Well, could I thank the Honourable Member for his support in this matter? And although the Dangerous Dogs Act itself doesn't actually apply to Northern Ireland, nevertheless there are arrangements in place. And it is a serious issue in Northern Ireland, as it is in the rest of the United Kingdom. And I will certainly liaise with him in the future when I pursue this issue further. Thank you. Madam Deputy Speaker, in the Dangerous Dogs Act, only 4 specific breeds of dogs are banned. They are Pit Bull Terrier, the Japanese Toso, the Dogo Argentino, and the Fila Brasileiro. Incredible though it may seem to many, the dog which attacked Jack Lees, an American XL bully, is not listed as a dangerous dog. But I am not calling for this particular breed of dog simply to be added to the list. There are many types of dogs, including crossbreeds, which you could argue ought to be on the list. but there are two fundamental problems with this approach. One is that because there is more and more crossbreeding, it is virtually impossible to maintain any kind of legislation which contains an up-to-date list. Secondly, prescribing certain breeds of dogs gives the erroneous impression that only listed dogs are dangerous and does not take into account how a dog is kept and trained. It has been said that most dogs have a potential for being dangerous if they're not trained properly. Now that brings me on to one of the main points that I want to make. And that is that I believe there is a need to fundamentally change our whole approach to so-called dangerous dogs. Rather than relying on breed-specific legislation, which is clearly inappropriate, the government ought to bring forward legislation which is based on a totally different approach to this issue. I know that the government has done a lot of work on this issue. There was a debate which I contributed to in Westminster Hall only a few weeks ago. In response to that debate, I thought the former minister's comments were encouraging, and I would hope today that the minister is able to take us forward a little bit further. The government's starting point has to be an acceptance that there is a lack of any real evidence to support a breed-specific approach to protecting the public. I believe that there is a large amount of independent research funded by DEFRA which lays the basis for a quite different approach. It shows that simply looking at a dog's breed is not an appropriate criteria to assess that dog's risk to people. I know that the government is fully aware of the conclusions of the House of Commons Select Committee inquiry, which states that the current dangerous dogs legislation fails to protect the public and also harms animal welfare. This is the view, too, of a whole range of organisations which have come together under the Dog Control Coalition. These organisations include the RSPCA, the Dogs Trust and the Kennel Club. Madam Deputy Speaker, it has now been over 30 years since the Dangerous Dogs Act was passed. And going beyond this act, it has to be said that the legal framework for dealing with dog bite incidents is very complex, with a number of different laws applicable depending on the circumstances surrounding the incident. But breed-specific legislation has another fundamental weakness, and that is the fact that it is to a large extent reactive in character. I believe that it is better to approach this issue of public safety before there is harm caused, rather than responding to the consequences. Prevention has to be the watchword. That is why I want to see a comprehensive and fundamentally different approach to this issue. A number of years ago, there were dog licenses. The government really ought to examine the possibility of reintroducing dog licenses, but this time we shouldn't simply see them as an easy way of government having an additional source of revenue. The money received should be used for a whole range of initiatives, including tackling the behavioural problems of certain kinds of dogs, which leads to dog bite incidents. Resources could also be provided for dealing with stray dogs and for helping to fund dog training. Let's not forget that at the moment dogs have to have microchips by the time they're 8 weeks old. Licensing could be an extension of this and a significant elaboration of it. I am pleased that the RSPCA Cymru agree with the approach I've outlined. And as animal welfare in Wales is devolved to the Welsh Senedd, I look forward to having a constructive dialogue on this issue with Hefin David, the member of the Senedd for Caerphilly, and the Welsh Government. Crucially, however, I also believe that there needs to be an effective assessment made of potential and actual owners of dogs. At the moment, anyone, quite literally, in any circumstances, can purchase virtually any kind of dog. Local authorities, I believe, should have a key role to play here. Also, local authorities ought to have the statutory responsibility of ensuring that dogs are kept and housed properly, and that their owners are ensuring that their dogs are correctly and appropriately trained. In addition, could I say that there needs to be a firm control on the buying and selling of dogs. To return to the tragic case of Jack Lees, the dog that killed him was purchased on Facebook not long before the attack. Such purchases cannot be allowed to continue. That is why I would urge the government to prevent the sale and purchase of dogs in this way. Today, many of my remarks have focused on the tragedy of Jack Lees, and I want to pay tribute to his family and especially his mother, Emma. She has been enormously brave during this whole difficult time. Nothing can bring back Jack, but all of us need to do our utmost to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Could I say that I look forward to the new minister's reply, and I encourage her to be as positive as she possibly can. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the Honourable Member for Caerphilly for securing this debate on such an important issue, and our usual friend from Strangford for joining in too. I've listened very carefully and appreciate the subject is of keen interest to you and to your constituents, and I understand the Honourable Member has recently contributed, as he stated, the Westminster Hall debate on breed-specific legislation and spoken publicly about dangerous dogs on a number of occasions. I appreciate the strength of feeling he has on this topic and commend him for his diligent campaigning. We have sadly seen a number of tragic fatalities from dog attacks in recent months, many involving children. This, of course, includes that tragic death of the Honourable Member's constituent, Jack Lees, in November last year. I note that the owner and the keeper of the dog were both sentenced last month under the Dangerous Dogs Act to 4.5 years and 3 years in prison, respectively, and have been banned, obviously, from owning dogs indefinitely. Sadly, on individual sentences, they are for the courts to decide based on all the evidence presented at trial, so I cannot comment further on that specific point. Again, I pass on my condolences to the Lees family, to Emma, who's bearing up so well. This government is determined to crack down on irresponsible dog ownership and promote safe interactions with dogs. We're already taking action on this, and I want to take the opportunity today to set this out in more detail. As colleagues may know, Middlesex University was commissioned by DEFRA to examine measures to reduce dog attacks and promote responsible dog ownership across all breeds of dog. We published that report in its recommendations in December last year, and in response to the report, we've established the Responsible Dog Ownership Project, working with police, local authorities, animal welfare stakeholders to consider the recommendations in detail and provide advice to government. The project's steering group is overseeing a series of specialist subgroups that are considering the recommendations and gathering further evidence and expertise from relevant stakeholders, academics and experts, and this will inform the project's final advice regarding the report's recommendations. And please be assured that the Honourable Gentleman's speech today, I will make sure, forms part of those consultations as well. The Responsible Dog Ownership Project's data subgroup was specifically considering the recommendation to improve recording of dog attack data and incident characteristics. The group will be giving specific consideration to current data collection practices across enforcement, healthcare and animal-based sectors, and identify how these could be improved to strengthen the evidence base relating to dog control incidents and dog attack, including breed-related trends. In addition, the Middlesex University report recommended the introduction of new legal requirements on dog ownerships. We will be considering this recommendation and any relevant evidence in more detail, including the merits of dog licensing. which I hope the honourable gentleman would be pleased about. The Responsible Dog Ownership Steering Group will also be looking at the possibility of strengthening enforcement, improving the quality and accessibility of dog training and awareness courses, and developing and supporting education initiatives. Again, it's as though the honourable gentleman read my script, but I'm pleased about that. All these areas will be looked at in detail, and the steering group will then provide advice to government as to how to take these forward. We expect the work on the project to be concluded next year, at which point the government will consider the advice and decide on next steps. In response to the recent tragedies involving children, we've also undertaken a rapid response in collaboration with stakeholders, police, local authorities and the devolved assemblies, administrations, to develop simple messages to promote safer interactions between children and dogs. The Dog Safety Code was launched in June and highlights 3 key messages that all dog owners and families with children need to be aware of. And they are, A, be alert, always keep an eye on your dog around children, never leave them alone together. B, be aware, get to know your dog. Dogs use signals to tell us how they feel. And C, be safe. Any dog can bite. Accidents happen far too fast. During the summer holidays, the Department of Health, Social Care, the Department for Education will be sharing this messaging for use by health visitors and child safeguarding professionals. This was also promoted during Child Safety Week in June. We want the Dog Safety Code to become embedded in future communications. Changing slight tack here, on breed-specific legislation, I do recognise the strength of feeling on this subject. Simply repealing the breed-specific provisions in the Dangerous Dog Act with no other changes would increase the risks to public safety. We must therefore balance the views of those who want to repeal the legislation with our responsibility to protect public safety. Any changes to breed-specific legislation that we may propose will need to ensure public safety remains at the heart of the regime. Nearly there, Madam Deputy Speaker, so we're all good on this. So Section 3 of the Dangerous Dogs Act makes it an offence to allow a dog of any breed or type to be dangerously out of control in any place. And as well as this, the Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act 2014 includes specific measures to enable the police and local authorities to tackle irresponsible dog ownership before a dog attack actually occurs, including through the use of community protection notices. So, to put my honourable friend's mind at rest, we will be exploring the effectiveness of the current legislation and areas for improvement as part of the ongoing work of the Responsible Dog Ownership Project. So, in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope that colleagues are reassured that we take these issues very seriously and are committed to protecting public safety. I look forward to discussing the conclusions of the Responsible Dog Ownership Project with colleagues when these are available and when the new Minister is appointed too. Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. The whole House sends its condolences to the family who are bereaved. It's a very, very sad story, and our hearts go out to them. The question is that this House do now adjourn. As many as that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.
más allá de esa fiesta. Reuniones de vinos y quesos, todo el país estaba cerrado, la cuarentena súper estricta, la gente no podía asistir a los funerales de sus seres queridos. Acá estaban en el jardín disfrutando con vino y queso, estaban haciendo fiestas, estaban trayendo alcohol, casi todos los días hubo cajas de drogas. Todas esas cosas que estamos enterando de a poquito, ¿no? No es que se violó la cuarentena, se violaron las normas, una sola vez, sino que fueron muchas cambiadas. Pero la gota que rebalsó el vaso y por cual el motivo por el cual 59 funcionarios renunciaron es que hace poco Boris Johnson anunció que una persona que va a llevar un cargo acá público iba a ser una persona que no mucho tuvo un conflicto con denuncias de abuso de fuerza fundamental. Y eso no fue tolerado. Como la gota que rebalsó el vaso, ese fue el momento en el que los miembros de su partido dijeron hasta acá llegamos. Mirá, yo creo que está complicado para el partido Tory, que sería el partido conservador, acá se llaman los Tory. Yo creo que sí está complicado. No sé qué va a pasar en las próximas elecciones generales, pero acá dando un juicio de opinión, un juicio de valor mío, me parece que el apoyo que tiene el partido bajó muchísimo en la población general. Ahora, tenemos dos posibles personas que podrían llegar a tomar un puesto de primer ministro. Estas son Ben Wallace, seguramente no la han escuchado mucho, que es el ministro de Defensa. Creo que es su figura favorita, porque es bajo perfil, que sería completamente lo opuesto a Boris Johnson. Respondió muy bien ante la guerra de Ucrania, respondió muy bien ante como la seguridad, lo que se llama Homeland Security, por así decirlo, aquí en el Reino Unido. Y la otra persona es Rishi Sunak, que seguro que el nombre de él le sube lo justo, porque Rishi Sunak fue una figura también atada a las fiestas de Downing Street, y más que perdió mucho apoyo y mucho valor durante el tiempo. Pero bueno, sigue siendo una de las figuritas favoritas para ocupar el puesto.
Ne oldu?
Şunu altına
Ha?
oturmak için olacak.
Okay, tomorrow with that, like, you know, specific being done there. Tom, just to pick up on things that you were saying though about kind of the process in terms of the weeks that are coming. What is the kind of expectation there among Conservative MPs about what may well happen in terms of the candidates, the number of votes that they get, the supporters that are currently behind them, and just how quickly and where the membership might be on the final two? Okay, Tom. Yes. go next. Do you think they're going to try and wrap this up quickly? But we will leave you on Downing Street at the moment on this historic day, the day in which Boris Johnson stand down as Conservative leader. The battle now will be how long he remains as Prime Minister. So back, first of all, at the top of the hour, the very latest
that we were going to get here last night, it just seemed like nothing could bring Boris Johnson out of that door to give his resignation. But he did it today after a meeting with his cabinet where they told him that he needed to quit. Also, the mass exodus of members of his government paralysing the administration. But when the speech finally came, Boris Johnson said that he's still going to remain a Labour until the party can find a place, and that could take until at least September. And even on top of that, Boris Johnson needs an optimist till the end. The criticism has been that there was very little humility in the speech. So now the attention turns to the next leadership contest. It'll have two stages. First of all, MPs are going to put themselves forward, and that will get whittled down to two. And then it'll be put to the grassroots membership to decide between them. But for now, the constitutional crisis is hurting. The Queen isn't having to tell Boris Johnson he can't have an election.
A escolha de um novo líder vai... 3, 2, 1. A escolha de um novo líder será feita pelos parlamentares conservadores num esquema de eliminação até que restem 2 candidatos. Aí vai ser feita uma votação entre todos. A escolha de um novo líder será feita por A escolha de um novo líder será feita pelos parlamentares conservadores num esquema de eliminação até que restem 2 candidatos. Aí acontecerá uma votação com todos os membros do Partido Conservador do Reino Unido. O vencedor... A escolha de um novo líder vai ser feita pelos parlamentares conservadores num esquema de eliminação até que restem 2 candidatos. Aí acontece uma votação em que todos os membros do partido podem votar. Quem for o escolhido vira o líder dos conservadores e receberá da Rainha Elizabeth II a tarefa de formar um novo governo. A escolha de um novo líder vai ser feita pelos parlamentares conservadores. A escolha de um novo líder vai ser feita pelos parlamentares conservadores, num esquema de eliminação até que restem 2 candidatos. Aí acontece uma votação. A escolha de um novo líder vai ser feita pelos parlamentares conservadores num esquema de eliminação até que restem 2 candidatos. Aí acontece uma votação em que todos os membros do partido podem votar. O líder... A escolha de um novo líder vai ser feita pelos parlamentares conservadores num esquema de eliminação, até que restem apenas 2 candidatos. Aí acontece uma votação por correio em que todos os membros do partido podem votar. O líder dos partidos... Nossa, tá difícil. It's hard. 3, 2, 1. O novo líder vai ser escolhido pelos parlamentares conservadores num esquema de eliminação até que restem apenas 2 2 candidatos. Aí acontece uma votação por correio, em que todos os membros do partido podem votar. O líder vira o... A escolha de um novo líder vai ser feita pelos parlamentares conservadores, num esquema de eliminação, até que restem apenas 2 candidatos. Aí acontece uma votação por correio, em que todos os membros do partido podem votar. A escolha de um novo líder vai ser feita pelos parlamentares conservadores num esquema de eliminação, até que restem apenas 2 candidatos. Quem vencer a disputa vira o líder do Partido Conservador, que tem a maioria das cadeiras no parlamento e vai receber da Rainha Elizabeth II a tarefa de formar um novo governo. Ok? Você entendeu? Só mais um. Ah! Argentina, somos vecinas, Brasil. Voy a intentar solo más un minuto, no te esperes. No, vale. No está en vivo ahora? No, claro. Ah, entonces bueno, no, prometo que 30 segundos. 3, 2, 1. El último salió bien. Sí. Gracias. 3, 2, 1. A escolha do novo líder vai ser feita pelos... A escolha do novo líder vai ser feita pelos parlamentares conservadores, num esquema de eliminação, até que restem apenas 2 candidatos. Aí acontece uma votação por correio entre todos os membros do partido. O líder vira o chefe do Partido Conservador e vai receber da Rainha Elizabeth II a tarefa de formar um novo governo. Checar... wireless. The problem is that the battery is very charged, but it's very good.
Thank you. I've been talking ليش؟ تقول لي خلينا نشوف الاجواء، المذيعة، أنا سامع المذيعة. تبي تشوف الاجواء؟ المذيعة تقول لي قم من الاجواء في المحل يا سيدي، تقولها مثلا اجي انا اعمل لك لازم اقول للزميل انت تحكي معاه وعاطي قهوه وكذا ورحت وتقول انا هوا ما في. وهون امام هذا الجروب غير محترم كلهم. لحظه شوف هوا تشوف واحد هذه الطريقه شيلها من الايد الهوا عيني فيه انت وانا هوا مش انا الاثنين فقط انت مش في الشارع هيك مقصد فيها شيء. شو قفل في لا 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 هادو رايحين راح جي شوي على يوم هذه حط عليها لكن قفلهم ليش؟ نروح نشرب قهوة وتقول ونرجع ما يلمس أحد مضمون. قفل فقط قفل كل شيء. شو أنت إذا بدك تقول وين حتقول أنت؟ لا 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 شوف احنا الساعة 6 لازم نكون هون. انت عندك 45 دقيقة تلعب فيها، مش عندك 45 لأن يقفلون الباب، ممنوع المغادرة وممنوع الدخول، ممنوع مغادرة هذا ورجوع. فأنت تقفل الآن عندك 45 دقيقة. هي حرة وإذا تستناني يكون أحسن. أروح طولت هذا اللي هيك هو عارف البوزيشن. اوكي تمام. خليك انا عارف. خليك هذا جيبوا جوا. لا يجيب حد حقه. جيبوا شوف خليه قبل كل شيء. انا بس البان اوكي لا مشكله هيك تمام.
See you soon. Yeah. Have fun. It was really nice to work with you as well. I did like our double up lectures this morning. It was fun.
Take care.
See you too. I'm Nick Robertson outside 10 Downing Street, and this is CNN. I'm Nick Robertson outside 10 Downing Street, and this is CNN. Just practicing. I'm Nick Robertson, outside 10 Downing Street, and this is CNN. I'm Nick Robertson. I'm Nick Robertson, outside 10 Downing Street, and this is CNN. I'm Nick Robertson, outside 10 Downing Street, and this is CNN. It's like turn around and there's another one, like the buses. Go ahead. I'm Nick Robertson, outside 10 Downing Street, and this is CNN. And channel 4, you please, I'm going to pass when you need. Another one? This will be the one, okay? I'm Nick Robertson, outside 10 Downing Street, and this is CNN. Just then a generic London one. Yeah, Nick Robertson, London, this is CNN. I'm Nick Robertson in London, and this is CNN. You are.
He's Nick Robertson. And this is CNN. At least you know who you are. That's good.
What you said that?
girls,
والله بالساعة 7
Very close.
لا هي كلها مرة شيء هو من هذاك
This afternoon, Boris Johnson resigned. It's not going quickly though. He says he's staying on here in the summer. Answer? Well, what impact will it have on London prisons? Oxford and
Just on 84. Hearing full black on AM. Sure thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, it is very important, and that is a clear signal on the part of Boris Johnson's office at number 10 that he is a safe pair of hands for this lengthy transition that he imagines he will be allowed to hold on for. This is part of his messaging to try to enable that. The concern would be, of course, that Boris Johnson might try and sort of wrangle ways to stay on in office longer, that he might try to sort of rush through new policies and intake a change in direction. That was one of the other things that the message was from Downing Street, that he will not have a change in direction. So it's the sort of stability, unity, not chaos type of message that is critical to Boris Johnson if he's to win over enough support to get what he wants, which is its longer transition. It's not, as we know, what the former Prime Minister John Major had said. He said it would be unwise to allow Boris Johnson to do this. Essentially, he has formed, not future.
Do you mind if we be neighbours?
They were initially planning to do
yes, there is a domestic hit. Yeah, 102. 72. It's much clearer. Is this domestic? Is this domestic? What about the 102 with Anna Carrera?
Tonight, Boris Johnson.
Okay, so what time is that?
50 resignations. Stick around. He gave in.
Okay, so
stand down.
hang up. So it's 15 minutes. It's not the end.
Hello, Darren. Hello, mate. Are you here all evening? Are you here all evening? Unfortunately, yes, I'm stuck. I think I've got a... I think we've got live at 9. And then hopefully we're done. I'm actually telling you. So I'll sort that. Thanks for that.
Yeah, so you're here. Speak back to you. Speak back here.
Your last live. What happens if you buy mine? Where's the box going? Oh, here's the line. It'll be here in a second. Hello, I can indeed, yes.
And then
Just use my camera.
Indeed, yeah. I can hear everyone, it's all good. I can indeed, yes.
give me a quick sound check, please.
Yeah, I'm going to roughly check at this level. It is a Thursday, Wednesday, Thursday. Yes,
Sorry? It's got a pair of lungs. Yeah. Do you want the choir?
So